The most dangerous man in the building is not the one drowning in debt. It is the one who has none. He is standing in the leasing office with a paid-off truck in the parking lot and a check in his hand, and the woman behind the counter is telling him no, not because he cannot pay, because the system cannot see him. You have spent your whole life thinking that being debt-free was the finish line. You were taught that the man who owes nothing is the man who is finally safe. But right now, today, in this country, the man who owes nothing is invisible to the very system that decides whether you get the apartment, the loan, the second chance. And invisible to a machine built entirely on tracking you is not safety. It is a red flag. Let me tell you about a man named Davis. Davis is 58 years old. He spent 31 years at the same manufacturing plant outside Dayton, the kind of job his father had, the kind of job that used to mean something when you said it out loud at a bar. He paid off his house in 2019, cash on the table, no mortgage hanging over his head for the first time since he was 26 years old. He carries one debit card. No credit cards, because his own father told him credit cards were a leash with a smile on it. No car note, because the truck in his driveway was paid for in full the year his daughter was born. Davis did everything you were told to do. He sacrificed when the men at the plant were buying boats. He said no 1,000 times to things that would have felt good for one weekend and cost him for 5 years. He built, brick by brick, exactly the kind of life every financial advisor on television tells you to build. And when his company needed him to relocate for 8 months to a sister plant in another state, and he went to rent a modest apartment near that plant, he was denied. Not for bad credit, for no credit. The system looked at a man who owed nothing to anyone on earth and stamped him as a risk. Think about that for 1 second. The man who was completely sovereign was flagged as dangerous. The man 2 cubicles over, $60,000 deep in revolving credit card debt, paying minimum payments every month of his life, was approved that same afternoon. That is not an accident. That is not a glitch in some leasing software. That is the entire architecture of the modern financial system working exactly as it was designed to work. Because the system was never built to measure whether you are responsible. It was built to measure whether you are profitable to lend to. A man who pays interest every month is a paycheck to a bank. A man who pays cash is nothing to a bank. He generates no interest rate, no late fee, no revolving balance, no leverage anyone can use over him. And a financial system that runs on leverage has no use, no category, no box to check. For a man who has removed himself from the game entirely, so it punishes him the only way it knows how. It makes him invisible, and then it calls that invisibility a risk. You have felt some version of this in your own life, whether it was an apartment, a refinance, a credit line you did not even want but needed for a single transaction, and the sting of it was the same every time. You followed the rules. The rules moved. Here is what almost nobody will tell you on the news, and it is the reason this entire story exists. There is a name for what Davis was actually exhibiting that day in the leasing office, and it has a legal weight behind it that most people his age were never taught. It is called being judgment-proof. It is a real legal standing, not a slogan, and it means a man whose assets are structured in such a way that creditors, courts, and collection agencies have nothing of value they can actually reach. The framework around it has existed in American law since long before 1970, woven into homestead exemptions, retirement account protections, and asset titling rules that most working men never once heard explained to them by a banker, because the banker's paycheck depends on you never reaching that status. The fact that you have spent 50 or 60 years on this earth without anyone sitting you down and explaining what it means to be financially untouchable was not an oversight. It was the plan working correctly. The same machine that denied Davis his apartment had every incentive to never let him understand what he had actually built. To understand why this machine exists at all, you have to go back to a very specific room in a very specific year with a very specific man whose name barely shows up in the textbooks your kids read in school. In 1956, a man named William Fair sat down in a small office in San Francisco with a mathematician named Earl Isaac, and together they built something they called a credit scoring system, sold initially to retailers and small lenders who were tired of guessing whether a man would pay them back. It seems almost quaint now. Two men with adding machines trying to remove the guesswork from lending. But what they built was not just a tool. It was a permanent shift in what it meant to be a trustworthy man in America. Before that office, before that year, your word, your handshake, your standing in your own town was the collateral. The local banker knew your father. He knew whether you showed up to work sober and on time. He knew if you had ever stiffed a man on a debt. Trust was earned face to face, over years, in a place where everyone could see you. William Fair and Earl Isaac did not destroy that system because it was broken. They destroyed it because it could not be scaled. And a system that cannot be scaled cannot be sold to every bank in the country for a fee. By the time the 1970s arrived, that scoring system had quietly become the backbone of nearly every lending decision in the country, and something enormous had shifted underneath the feet of the American worker without him ever being told. The new system did not measure your character. It measured your behavior with debt. It rewarded men who borrowed and repaid on a predictable schedule, and it had no working language at all for a man who simply did not participate. Your grandfather's reputation, the thing he spent 40 years building in a small town where everybody knew his name, was replaced by a 3-digit number generated by a formula he was never shown and could never appeal in plain English. The old code of earned trust, the handshake, the steady record in the eyes of your own community, was being slowly digitized into something a corporation owned and controlled. And once a corporation owns the definition of trustworthy, every man in the country starts performing for that definition instead of for his own conscience. That is the moment the trap was built. Not in a dark room with bad intentions, but in a tidy office with two men trying to solve a logistics problem who accidentally rewired what it means to be a respectable man in America. The mechanism is identical today, only the names have changed. It used to be Fair and Isaac, selling a formula to a handful of department stores. Now it is 3 credit bureaus, a handful of algorithms nobody outside the industry fully understands, and an entire economy of buy now, pay later apps engineered to make sure a 25-year-old never goes a single month without an active line of revolving debt feeding that same scoring engine. You are living inside the exact same logic Davis got caught in every single day, whether you notice it or not. Every time your bank suggests a credit line increase you did not ask for. Every time a car dealership pushes you toward financing instead of the cash price sitting right there on the sticker. Every time a mortgage company quietly nudges you toward the loan with a higher rate because the loan officer's commission depends on the size of that monthly payment, not on your long-term financial independence. The system was never your enemy in some dramatic, cinematic sense. It was simply built by people solving for their own profit, and your sovereignty was never part of their equation. Now, let me show you how the machine actually runs, mechanically. Because once you see the gears, you will never look at your own monthly statement the same way again. Picture a casino, but instead of chips, the currency is your future income. Every loan, every credit card, every car note is a bet the casino makes that you will keep showing up to the table and keep paying the house a small percentage every single month for years, sometimes decades. The house does not need you to win big. The house does not even want you to pay off the balance, because a paid-off balance is a closed account, and a closed account stops generating interest. The house wants you exactly where Davis's coworker was, comfortable enough to keep paying the minimum, scared enough to never miss a payment, and never quite organized enough to attack the principal directly. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is the literal business model written into every annual report these companies file. They call it revenue per active account. You would call it your life. Now meet mirror character 2, a man named Robert, 63 years old, who spent 27 years as a regional manager for a logistics company in Ohio, and who did the opposite of what Davis did, and got punished just as badly. Robert trusted the system completely. He maxed out his 401k contributions every single year. He kept a healthy mortgage because his financial advisor told him mortgage interest was good debt, the kind that builds your credit profile and gets you better rates everywhere else. He had a 6-figure salary, a respectable title, a corner office with his name on a little plaque, and a severance package he assumed would carry him for at least a year if anything ever went wrong. In 2023, his entire division was eliminated in a single afternoon, replaced by a smaller team and a piece of software. And he received a severance check that the inflation of the last 3 years had already quietly devoured by the time it landed in his account. He had played the corporate game with total loyalty for almost 3 decades, and in one performance review cycle, his employer recalibrated and decided that loyalty was no longer a line item worth budgeting for. Robert was not punished for excess debt the way you might assume. He was punished for trusting an institution that owed him nothing back, no matter how many years he had given it. But here is the part that nobody tells you, and it is the part that changes the entire shape of this story. The reason Davis's posture in that leasing office felt unshakable even while he was being denied, the reason he did not raise his voice, did not beg, did not perform outrage for the woman behind the counter, is not because he had good manners. It is because of math. A man with no mortgage payment, no credit score he is desperate to protect, no creditor who can call him at dinner, has nothing in that room he is afraid of losing. That is the entire secret behind every quietly powerful man you have ever stood next to and felt small around without knowing why. His composure was never a personality trait. It was the direct output of having no leverage anyone could hold over him. Social authority and financial sovereignty are the same posture, viewed from 2 different angles, and once you see that, you cannot unsee it in a single room you walk into for the rest of your life. Think about every man you have ever respected on sight before he said a single word. He did not perform confidence. He simply needed nothing from the room. He was not trying to impress the lender because he did not need the lender. He was not trying to impress his boss at the holiday party because his income did not depend on being liked that particular evening. That quiet, unbothered presence men used to carry without effort, the kind your own father or grandfather seemed to have without trying, was never about charisma. It was the natural exterior of a man who had already removed every lever the system could pull on him. And here is the engineered part, the part that should make you angry in a controlled, useful way. Beginning in roughly the early 1960s, the advertising industry in this country began a deliberate, well-funded campaign to reframe thrift itself as embarrassing? To reframe the paid-off truck and the modest house as signs of a man who was falling behind rather than a man who had already won. They needed you spending. A satisfied man does not buy. And a man who does not buy is the one thing that machine cannot survive. You are living at the tail end of that 15-year campaign right now, every single day, whether you clock it or not. Every commercial that frames the bigger house as success. Every casual comment from a coworker about your boring paid-off car. Every subtle social pressure to keep up a lifestyle that requires you to keep borrowing just to maintain the appearance of doing well. That pressure did not arrive by accident. It arrived because an entire industry discovered, decades ago, that a content man who needs nothing is worthless to them, and a restless man who needs everything is their entire business model. The code your father lived by, steady, modest, quiet, debt-averse, was not abandoned because it stopped working. It was deliberately buried because it worked too well, and a man who carried himself that way did not need to be sold a single thing for the rest of his natural life. So here is the only question that actually matters, and it has nothing to do with a spreadsheet. What kind of man do you want to be standing in that room, whatever room it turns out to be? The leasing office, the loan officer's desk, the boardroom after the restructuring announcement. Do you want to be a name in the system's database, generating revenue per active account until the day you die, performing creditworthiness for an algorithm that will never once say thank you? Or do you want to be the man the system cannot quite categorize, the one who walks out of the leasing office, denied, gets in his paid-off truck, and drives home to a paid-off house, completely unbothered, because nothing in that building had any real power over him to begin with? Davis is still that man today. He found a smaller, family-run property 2 towns over that did not run a credit check at all, just asked for references and a conversation, the old way, the way his own father would have recognized instantly. He pays his rent there in full, on time, every single month, and he sleeps fine at night. Some of these ideas were never meant to be spelled out plainly, because a quiet man does not advertise his own playbook. I put 180 of them into a puzzle book called Financial Invisibility, each one built as a cryptogram you have to sit with and decode for yourself. Link in the description. The men who understood this were never the loudest ones in the room. They were simply the ones everyone else, without quite knowing why, could not stop watching.